The night was quiet, eerily so. I was wrapping up my shift at the Walmart in Willow Ridge, where I'd been working the late hours for months now. It was one of those shifts where time seemed to crawl, and the silence of the near-empty store made every creak of the shelves or hum of the fluorescent lights seem louder. I was stationed at the register, absently shuffling receipts and waiting for the clock to tick closer to closing. That's when I noticed him, Keanu Reeves. Yes, that Keanu Reeves, walking into my Walmart like he was just another guy in need of groceries. I blinked, thinking I must have been imagining it, but there he was, dressed casually in jeans and a jacket, his hair tied back neatly. He didn't make a big show of himself. He walked straight to the counter and asked, "Where's the electronics section?" "Back corner, past the housewares," I answered, pointing vaguely. I didn't even register what I'd said until he thanked me and disappeared down the aisle. Was I starstruck? Maybe. But mostly, I was confused. What was Keanu Reeves doing in a sleepy little Walmart at this hour? As I tried to get back to work, my eyes kept drifting toward the aisles, curious to see if he'd reappear. A few minutes passed, and that's when I saw him again, but something was different. He wasn't heading for electronics anymore. Instead, he'd stopped in the baby care aisle, crouched near a small figure I hadn't noticed before. It was a little girl, maybe 6 years old. She was barefoot, wearing nothing but a tank top and shorts, and clutching a pack of diapers so tightly it looked like she'd never let them go. My heart sank. Something about her was wrong. Not just her appearance, but her posture, her stillness. She didn't look scared or lost. She looked resigned. Keanu knelt down beside her, speaking softly. "Hey there," he said. His voice was calm, gentle. "Are you okay? Where's your mom or dad?" The girl didn't answer. She just stared at him with those big, empty eyes, like she couldn't decide if she could trust him. It was heartbreaking to watch. I stayed frozen at my register, torn between letting them figure things out and stepping in myself. But Keanu didn't move from her side. He kept his voice low, trying to coax something, anything, out of her. "Do you live nearby?" he asked after a moment. This time, she nodded. Barely. Her small shoulders lifted and dropped in the faintest of movements. "Can I walk with you?" he offered. "Just to make sure you're safe." The girl hesitated, clutching the diapers even tighter. Then, after a long moment, she gave him a tiny, reluctant nod. That was all Keanu needed. He rose to his feet and glanced toward me. "Can you watch my car?" he asked, his tone more of a polite request than a demand. Sure," I stammered. Are you going to follow her home?" He nodded. "She shouldn't be alone out there." I wanted to argue, but what could I say? He was right. I watched as he and the girl headed toward the exit, the sound of her bare feet against the tile echoing in the silence. They stepped out into the cool night air, and just like that, they were gone. As the automatic doors hissed shut behind them, I stood there for a moment, trying to shake off the strange feeling in my gut. This wasn't just a kid who got separated from her parents. Something about her silence, her tight grip on those diapers, felt like a warning. I couldn't help but wonder, who was this girl? And why was Keanu Reeves, one of the biggest stars in the world, walking her home like it was the most normal thing in the world? The automatic doors shut behind them, and I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. The store felt quieter than ever. I looked at the clock, 15 minutes until closing, and tried to distract myself by organizing receipts, but my mind kept drifting back to the girl and Keanu Reeves. Where could they be headed? Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward the baby care aisle where she'd been standing. The shelves were neat except for one pack of diapers on the floor, likely knocked down in her struggle to reach for it. I picked it up and placed it back, the weight of the moment settling on me. Who was this child? Why was she here alone, in the middle of the night, holding on to diapers like her life depended on it. As I returned to the front of the store, I noticed Maria, one of my co-workers, closing up her register. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice low. "Did you see that little girl earlier?" Maria looked up, frowning. "The one with the diapers?" "Yeah, I saw her." "Weird, right? I figured she had a parent somewhere." "She didn't," I said, my voice tight. "Keanu Reeves just left with her. He's walking her home." Maria blinked, her mouth falling open. "Wait, the Keanu Reeves?" "Yeah. And I don't think that girl should have been out there alone." Maria's face softened, worry replacing her initial shock. "Should we call someone?" "The police, maybe?" I hesitated. It felt like the right thing to do, but at the same time, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. What if her family was just nearby? What if Keanu had it under control? "Let's wait," I said finally. "If something's really wrong, he'll let us know." Meanwhile, Keanu followed the girl, Emma. She'd quietly told him her name, as she shuffled down the poorly lit street. Her small figure seemed to shrink even further in the dark, the diapers nearly slipping from her grasp as she walked. Keanu stayed a few paces behind, careful not to make her feel crowded. "Emma," he said after a while, his voice gentle, "how far is your house?" She pointed down the road, her movements stiff and mechanical. She didn't speak again, and Keanu couldn't help but notice how carefully she avoided looking at him. The silence between them was thick with unspoken fear. The neighborhood changed as they walked. The streetlights grew dimmer, the houses more run down. Boarded-up windows and overgrown lawns lined the block, each one looking more neglected than the last. Keanu felt a knot tighten in his chest. He was used to seeing polished sets and glittering cities, this felt like another world entirely. When Emma finally stopped, it was in front of a small, dilapidated house. The paint was peeling, the windows were cracked, and the front yard was choked with weeds. She pointed at the door. "That's home," she whispered. Keanu crouched to her level, his expression soft. "Is anyone inside?" Emma hesitated, then shook her head. "Mom's not here." His heart sank. "How long has she been gone?" She glanced at the ground, her little hands fidgeting with the diaper pack. "2 nights," she said quietly. "Maybe 3. Keanu took a steadying breath, fighting back the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Emma, do you have a phone number for your mom? Someone I can call?" She shook her head again, her lips pressing into a thin line. "She doesn't like phones." Keanu's jaw tightened. He knew he couldn't leave her here, not like this. "Can I come inside? Just to make sure everything's okay?" Emma looked at him for a long moment, her wide eyes filled with uncertainty. Then, slowly, she nodded. The house was dark inside, the air thick with the smell of dampness and neglect. Keanu flicked on the light switch near the door, illuminating a small living room that was more clutter than furniture. Toys were scattered across the floor, mixed with empty food wrappers and piles of laundry. In the corner, a toddler, barely 2 years old, peeked out from behind an overturned chair, his wide eyes fixed on the stranger. "That's Benji," Emma said softly, motioning toward the toddler. "He's my brother." Keanu crouched again, offering the boy a small, reassuring smile. "Hi, Benji. I'm Keanu." Benji didn't respond. He just stared, his thumb in his mouth. Keanu turned back to Emma, his voice steady. "You've been taking care of him by yourself?" She nodded. "Mom left us food," she said, pointing toward the kitchen. "But it's gone now." Keanu's chest tightened. He walked to the kitchen, opening the fridge. It was almost empty, save for a few half-empty bottles and a container of milk that had gone bad. The cupboards weren't much better, an open box of cereal, a few cans of soup, and a container of baby formula that was nearly empty. "How long have you been out of food?" Keanu asked, his voice soft but urgent. Emma shrugged. Since yesterday, I think. Keanu's fists clenched at his sides. This wasn't just neglect, it was survival. And it was clear Emma had been left to fend for herself and her brother far too often. Keanu stood in the middle of the dimly lit kitchen, his thoughts racing. Every detail he'd noticed, Emma's bare feet, her silence, the diapers she'd carried like a lifeline, now made sense. She wasn't just a lost child. She was a caretaker. A 6-year-old forced to shoulder responsibilities no child her age should ever have to face. He glanced back at Benji, still hiding behind the chair. His thumb bobbed in and out of his mouth, his wide eyes following Keanu's every movement. Keanu couldn't imagine what life had been like for these two. The house, the empty fridge, the toddler's silent fear, it painted a picture of neglect that was impossible to ignore. Emma stood quietly near the door, watching him with the same wary eyes. She held the pack of diapers tightly, like she was afraid someone might take it away from her. Keanu crouched down to her level again, keeping his voice soft. Emma, he said gently, you've been so brave. Taking care of Benji like this, it's amazing. But you shouldn't have to do this alone. Emma's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting away. Mom says we're fine, she mumbled. She'll come back soon. Keanu hesitated. He didn't want to scare her, but he couldn't leave without doing something. I want to help, he said, his tone firm but kind. Can I bring you some food? Something for you and Benji to eat tonight? Emma looked up at him, her small face caught between hope and mistrust. Finally, she gave a tiny nod. Okay, Keanu said, standing up. I'll be back soon. I promise. He glanced at Benji one more time before heading for the door. Emma followed, stopping just before he stepped outside. You'll come back, right? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu knelt again, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. I promise, he said. Stay inside, lock the door, and I'll be back as soon as I can. Back in his car, Keanu's mind raced. He'd parked it a few blocks away when he followed Emma, and now, as he sat behind the wheel, the reality of what he'd seen hit him hard. He couldn't imagine leaving them there, but he also couldn't act recklessly. This wasn't something he could handle on his own. He started the engine and drove back to the Walmart. By the time he pulled into the parking lot, the store was closed, its lights dimmed. Frustration bubbled up inside him, but he pushed it down. There had to be another option. A quick search on his phone led him to a 24-hour gas station a few miles away. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. He drove there quickly, grabbed a basket, and started filling it with whatever he could find: bread, peanut butter, snacks, baby formula, milk, and some canned foods that didn't need cooking. As an afterthought, he grabbed diapers in a smaller size for Benji, just in case. When he reached the counter, the cashier, a tired-looking teenager, barely glanced at him. Busy night? The kid asked, scanning the items. Something like that, Keanu replied, his tone distracted. As soon as he paid, he loaded the bags into his car and headed back toward Emma and Benji's house. The streets were quieter now, the occasional bark of a dog or hum of a distant car the only sounds breaking the silence. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him. He didn't know how the night would end, but he was certain of one thing: he couldn't just walk away. Keanu parked outside the house and approached the front door, the bags of food heavy in his hands. He knocked softly, not wanting to startle the children. After a few seconds, the door creaked open, and Emma peeked out. I'm back, Keanu said, smiling gently. He held up the bags. I brought some things for you and Benji. Emma stepped aside, letting him in. The toddler was still in the same spot, but his eyes lit up when he saw the bags. Keanu placed everything on the kitchen counter and began unpacking it. He handed Emma a juice box and a small sandwich he'd grabbed at the gas station. "Here," he said. "Eat this while I get some milk ready for Benji." Emma hesitated for a moment before taking the sandwich. She unwrapped it carefully, like it was a treasure, and took a small bite. Keanu poured the formula into a bottle, mixing it as quickly as he could. When it was ready, he handed it to Benji, who grabbed it eagerly and began drinking. For a moment, the house felt lighter. The children were eating, their small faces less guarded, and Keanu felt a flicker of relief. But it didn't last long. The weight of their situation hung in the air, and he knew this was only a temporary fix. As Emma finished her sandwich, Keanu knelt beside her again. "Emma," he said carefully, "is there anyone you can stay with? A neighbor, maybe? Someone who can help you until your mom comes back?" Emma shook her head. "It's just me and Benji." Keanu's heart ached at her words. He looked around the small, cluttered house, at the peeling wallpaper and the cracked windows, and made a decision. He couldn't leave them here, not like this. "Okay," he said softly. "I'm going to call someone who can help. But I'll stay with you until they come." Emma's eyes widened, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. "You won't leave?" Keanu shook his head. "Not until I know you're safe." Keanu stayed seated at the kitchen table, his phone in hand. The police and child services were the only option now, and he knew it was a call he had to make. He dialed the non-emergency line and explained the situation as calmly and clearly as he could, making sure they understood the urgency. The operator assured him that officers and a social worker would arrive shortly. "Emma," Keanu said softly as he hung up the phone, turning to her and Benji. "Some people are coming to help. They'll make sure you and Benji have food, a safe place to stay, and someone to take care of you." Emma looked at him, her small face tight with worry. "Will they take us away?" Keanu hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They're going to keep you and Benji safe, okay? That's the most important thing right now. And I'll be here to make sure everything's okay." She nodded slowly, clutching Benji's tiny hand. The toddler leaned against her, finishing the last of the formula. Keanu's heart ached at the sight of the two of them, so small and vulnerable but holding on to each other with such strength. Within 20 minutes, the sound of approaching sirens filled the quiet street. Keanu stood by the window and watched as 2 police cars and an unmarked sedan pulled up outside the house. He stepped out to meet them, his steady presence a sharp contrast to the chaotic emotions swirling in his chest. The lead officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, approached him. "Mr. Reeves?" she asked, her tone professional but kind. "Yes," Keanu replied. "They're inside, Emma and her brother, Benji. Their mother's been gone for days. There's no food, and the house isn't safe." The officer nodded and motioned for her team to follow. As they entered the house, Keanu knelt beside Emma and Benji, who were sitting on the couch. "These are the people I told you about," he said gently. "They're here to help." Emma clung to Benji's hand as one of the officers knelt down to her level, speaking softly. The social worker, a warm woman named Sarah, crouched beside them, offering a gentle smile. "Hi, Emma," she said. "I'm Sarah. I'm going to make sure you and your brother are safe, okay?" Emma looked at Keanu, her wide eyes searching his face for reassurance. He nodded, his voice steady. "It's okay, Emma. You can trust her." As the officers and social worker worked, Keanu stepped outside to give them space. He leaned against the porch railing, his gaze fixed on the darkened street. The weight of the night pressed heavily on him, but he knew he'd done the right thing. After what felt like an eternity, Sarah stepped outside to speak with him. "Thank you for calling," she said. "You did the right thing. These children have been through so much, but now we can get them the care they need." "What happens next?" Keanu asked, his voice low. "They'll be placed in emergency foster care for now," Sarah explained. We'll work on finding their mother and figuring out the best long-term solution. It's clear Emma's been the one keeping things together for her brother. She's an incredible little girl. Keanu nodded, his throat tight. Is there any way I can stay involved? To make sure they're okay? Sarah smiled softly. I can put you in touch with the foster family and their caseworker. It's rare for someone in your position to get personally involved, but if you're willing, it could make a world of difference. I'm willing, Keanu said without hesitation. As the children were gently guided into the social worker's car, Emma turned back one last time, her small face framed by the glow of the streetlights. Will I see you again? She asked, her voice trembling. Keanu walked over, crouching to her level. You bet, he said, his voice firm but warm. You're not alone in this, Emma. I'll make sure you and Benji are okay. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Then, before climbing into the car, she surprised him by wrapping her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Thank you, she whispered. Keanu held her gently, his own eyes stinging. You're welcome, Emma, he said softly. Stay strong. As the car pulled away, Keanu stood on the porch, watching the taillights disappear into the night. The street grew quiet again, but the weight in his chest began to lift. He'd made a promise, and he intended to keep it. Epilogue. True to his word, Keanu stayed involved. He connected with the foster family, ensuring Emma and Benji had everything they needed. He even helped arrange counseling for both children and offered to cover their education in the future. When their mother was eventually found and agreed to enter a rehabilitation program, Keanu provided the support she needed to rebuild her life. In the months that followed, Emma and Benji's lives transformed. With a safe home and a supportive network, they began to thrive. And though they couldn't fully understand the gravity of what Keanu had done for them, one thing was clear: he had changed their lives forever. For Keanu, the night was a reminder of the quiet power of compassion. Sometimes, a single moment of kindness can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we could never predict. And for Emma and Benji, it was the beginning of a brighter, safer future.